I've had this idea for a video for several months now, if not longer, and I've just been waiting for the right time to put together this video and give you my idea for why I think Red Dead Online should have been set in 1908 as opposed to 1898. And I think it's fitting because we're approaching the end of the year. It's almost here. Hard to believe that. And unfortunately, if we don't end up getting any more content for Red Dead Online in 2022, I'm afraid that after the seasonal call to arms, that might be it for Red Dead Online. Personally, I would like to see Rockstar continue to update Red Dead Online, but at the moment, it's looking rather grim for Red Dead Online. But what if Rockstar had made the decision to put Red Dead Online in a different timeline as opposed to 1898, which is the current timeline for Red Dead Online, a year prior to Red Dead Redemption 2. What if, however, Rockstar decided to put Red Dead Online a year after the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2, which was 1907? What if Red Dead Online was set in 1908? Yes, there are spoilers from Red Dead Redemption 2. It's been out for over 3 years now. You have been warned going forward. There will be spoilers from Red Dead Redemption 2. Now let's talk about the changes that would be made or needed to be made with the map of Red Dead Online 1908. There would have to be quite a few changes. Most of the map actually could remain the same, similar to the way the map is in 1907 during the epilogue period of Red Dead Redemption 2. But there would have to be some changes in 1908. For one thing, I think that Blackwater needs to be built up a little bit more to look more like the Blackwater from 1911's Red Dead Redemption. And yeah, you're going to see B-roll from Red Dead Redemption in this video just to give you a better idea of the vision I'm going towards. I do apologize that graphically Red Dead Redemption does not look as good as Red Dead Online or Red Dead Redemption 2, but for the purposes of this video, I'm using B-roll from Red Dead Redemption. So I want to see Blackwater look more like the Blackwater from 1911 with everything built up, including the rail line. We'll get to the rail line in a minute. But staying in West Elizabeth right now, what other regions do I want to see built up a little bit? I would say Manzanilla Post needs to be built up, Beecher's Hope, as well as the area that was Dutch's hideout near the end of Red Dead Redemption. That could just be sitting there just waiting to be used, not in the same condition as it ends up being at the end of that story in Red Dead Redemption, but I think that that hideout that Dutch had needs to exist, and who knows, maybe that would be a good idea to include Dutch as a character you can interact with in Red Dead Online 1908, but we'll get to the characters in a little bit. So for West Elizabeth, Blackwater, Manzanilla Post, Beecher's Hope, Dutch's hideout, all those locations need to be built up. Along with the railroad over there, the railroad location, that should be built up as well. And speaking of the rail line, yes, I want the rail line throughout West Elizabeth up and fully running and operational from Blackwater all the way up to Manzanilla Post and all the way out to New Austin and back again, just like it is in Red Dead Redemption. I'm actually surprised that Rockstar made the decision not to have the rail line fully functional in 1898 and 1899 or 1907 in Red Dead Redemption 2, because Blackwater is the second largest town in Red Dead Redemption 2, second only to Saint Denis. It is a popular town, and you think that the rail line would be fully functional from the waters of Flatiron Lake all the way out further west to New Austin. You think that the rail line would already exist, but that's just one of many small issues I happen to have with decisions made regarding Red Dead Redemption 2. So yeah, the rail line would be fully operational as we move from West Elizabeth into New Austin, and there definitely needs to be some changes in New Austin, some choices made regarding areas in the epilogue I disagree with. First off, let's go right across the border in New Austin to Thieves Landing. I always felt like the 1907 Thieves Landing doesn't really work as well because in 1911, it's way more built up. You have a bar, you have a brothel, you have some other businesses over there. And if we go around Thieves Landing, it feels like these buildings have been around a lot longer than 4 years. It feels like they've been around at least a decade or longer. That was the first of many issues I have with decisions made by Rockstar when it comes to Red Dead Redemption 2 Red Dead Online's map. with Thieves Landing, it should have actually been built up to look more like it does in 1911. So I would have Thieves Landing in 1908 look very similar to the Thieves Landing in 1911 from Red Dead Redemption. Now let's go over to McFarland Ranch. There needs to be some changes to McFarland Ranch. The barn should have been built by now, because Bonnie even mentions how the barn was being built or was already built when she was just a child. And I think that the barn should be there. I think that the station by the rail tracks at McFarland Ranch should be fully operational. It should be a much bigger building than it is in Red Dead Online. And you should also have the foreman's office, the general store. Those should be fully built up as well by 1908. So that is the improvements I would like to see at McFarland Ranch in Red Dead Online 1908 as we move further west to Armadillo. Now, this is something that gets me really triggered when it comes to Armadillo in the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2 as well as Red Dead Online. You're telling me, Rockstar, that Armadillo was cursed by cholera from at least 1898, maybe further back, all the way up to 1907, and then magically in 1911 in Red Dead Redemption, it feels like the town never had a cholera issue at all. It's supposed to be a thriving Wild West town. And this was a missed opportunity and a terrible mistake by Rockstar, in my opinion, to make Armadillo Carla reveal, or whatever the hell you want to call it. I just never liked the look of Armadillo in Red Dead Redemption 2 Epilogue or Red Dead Online. I feel like this is a terrible idea because, like I mentioned, this is supposed to be a Wild West game, a set in the American Old West, and this is the iconic Wild West town. Armadillo should be thriving in 1898 as well as 1907, just like it is in 1911. So this is one major change I would make of Armadillo in 1908's Red Dead Online. I would have it to where they've gotten over cholera and they are rebuilding Armadillo and it's thriving once again. So Armadillo in 1908's Red Dead Online would be post-cholera and thriving. Now, Armadillo is not the only city that exists in New Austin. You also have Tumbleweed, and by the events of 1911 Red Dead Redemption, yes, Tumbleweed is a ghost town used by bandits. But I feel like we could have a little leeway here with Tumbleweed and make it to where Tumbleweed still exists. It still has Sheriff Mormon out there, still has the shops, the butchers, but it's obviously dying. There's less people living in Tumbleweed, but it's still populated. It hasn't been completely abandoned by the populace of Tumbleweed, but you can tell that Tumbleweed is on its way out. And you kind of get the idea in the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2 that that's the case, but you could still have two competing towns between Tumbleweed and Armadillo in Red Dead Online 1908. There's so many missed opportunities with having Armadillo as fully functional. Besides having Herbert Moon in the bar, you could have a doctor there, you could have a stable in Armadillo, you could have other businesses going on in Armadillo as well, and potential properties that you could buy with Red Dead Online 1908. So yeah, I really wish that Rockstar would have had a different vision for Armadillo as well as Thieves Landing. And those are the two that I have the most issue with New Austin. McFarland Ranch needs to be built up a little bit like we talked about, but Thieves Landing definitely needs to be a lot bigger than it is. And what was done to Armadillo in Red Dead Redemption 2 Epilogue and Red Dead Online doesn't make sense and is a crying shame. So heading back east, West Elizabeth, you got Beat Yourself built up with the Marstons. You have Manzanilla Post built up as well to the way it looks in 1911. And the other new location in West Elizabeth that makes sense because it exists in the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2 is Pronghorn Ranch. Obviously, Pronghorn Ranch should exist. The Gettys should exist. I think those would be some good characters to interact with in Red Dead Online 1908. Good mission givers. And we'll get to the characters that I think should be in Red Dead Online 1908 and the characters that most likely should not be because they would be dead because of the events of Red Dead Redemption 2, as well as some additions. So now we're going to talk about the mission givers, the characters, the strangers that you would encounter in Red Dead Online 1908. Since this is once again a different time period than where Red Dead Online is currently at in 1898, which means, as I was talking about a moment ago, there are characters that could not exist in Red Dead Online in 1908 because they're dead. Some might still be alive, others are alive, and there could also be some really good additions when it comes to characters and strangers, mission givers for Red Dead Online 1908. So first off, the Red Dead Online specific characters. These are characters that only exist in Red Dead Online, not Red Dead Redemption 2. They don't cross over between the two games. Red Dead Online specific characters would still remain, but you could just simply move the timeline up from 1898 to 1908. For example, in the tutorial, when your character is in Sisika, it would be 1908 as opposed to 1898. Horley would rescue you. You would meet Jessica Leclerc, do missions for her and Horley. All the Land of Opportunity missions will be set in 1908 as opposed to 1898, as well as all the roles interacting with Cripps, Maggie, Marcel, along with Harriet, Gus, Madame Nazar. All you'd have to do is just move all that good stuff up from 1898 up to 1908 for my vision of Red Dead Online. So yeah, the majority of the characters you interact with from Red Dead Online only would still exist in the 1908 version. Yeah, there are characters you do interact with in Red Dead Online specifically that end up getting killed. It would be the same thing. Instead of being killed in 1898, they would be killed in 1908. Now let's talk about the characters that exist in both Red Dead Redemption 2 and Red Dead Online. These are the characters that should be dead. Now, bear in mind, I did do a bit of research. There's always a chance I may have missed a character or two. For that, I sincerely apologize. But these are the characters that are mission givers and strangers from Red Dead Redemption 2 that would be dead, unfortunately, in 1908's version of Red Dead Online. Now, some of them you're probably glad they're dead. Others, it sucks that they're gone. But I think it's a good trade-off because we're going to get some additional characters that'll make the difference, in my opinion, more or less. So here are the dead characters. And once again, if I missed a character, I apologize. Sean McGuire, James Langton, Joe. I know, no one's going to miss Joe. Jake Adler, Sadie's husband, Sheriff Gray from Rhodes, Hamish Sinclair. Really doesn't matter if you interact with him in 1899 with Arthur or 1907 with John. Either way, he's going to die. Whether it's 99 or 07, he's still dead technically. Flaco Hernandez is dead. Most of the Driscolls are dead, so we could replace the Driscolls gang with the Laramie boys. So that could be the other gang that you encounter. I think all the other gangs still exist. The Skinner brothers, the Murphy Brews, the Lobos, etc. Those gangs could still exist in 1908's Red Dead Online. It makes sense for them to still be out there. But when it comes to the Driscolls, they're completely wiped out. So just simply replace the Driscolls with the Laramies. We also have, Bartholomew Braithwaite. He's gone. A lot of Braithwaites, a lot of Grays are dead. Well, not as many Grays, but the majority of the Braithwaites are gone, so they can't be a thing in 1908's Red Dead Online. There are some characters you kind of sort of could interact with, or maybe not interact with, and some of them it's kind of left up to the decision of the player, whether as Arthur or John, to spare them or kill them. Now, these could theoretically still be alive. Mama Watson, she could still be alive. Anthony Foreman. Now, Anthony Foreman, yeah, that's a main story mission, rescuing Tilly, and you have the opportunity to either spare Anthony Foreman or kill him. I would say that if you're going good honor as Arthur Morgan as the canonical ending to Red Dead Redemption 2, I would say that despite everything Anthony Foreman did, Arthur would probably choose to spare him because he did get Tilly back alive. So Anthony Foreman could theoretically still be a mission giver in Red Dead Online 1908. Meanwhile, with Tammy and Bray Aberdeen. Now, this is interesting because you don't have to ever come across the lovely siblings of Tammy and Bray as Arthur or John, but you could come across them if you want to. So they could still be alive. They could be dead. You kind of put them in a state of limbo where they could theoretically be mission givers for Red Dead Online 1908, but maybe not. I guess it's just depending on whether or not we want to keep them around. You also have the Widow up in the northeastern part of the map, north of Ansburg. She could still be alive because you have the choice to either interact with her or not even at all. And she could be dead. She could be alive. So let's just say she's alive. Let's just say she survives and she has a positive encounter with Arthur or John. And she's still alive in 1908. And she could also be a good mission giver in Red Dead Online 1908, such as Alden, Angus, Black Belle, Bonnie McFarlane. This makes more sense for Bonnie McFarlane to exist in 1908 Red Dead Online than 1898 Red Dead Online. Because if we go by the way she looks in 1911, she doesn't look that old. She looks like she might be in her 20s, maybe 30s at the most. I don't even think she's that old in 1911 Red Dead Redemption. So it really doesn't make sense for Bonnie to be as old as she appears in 1989 Red Dead Online. Having Bonnie as a mission giver for Red Dead Online 1908 makes more sense timeline-wise than it does having her as a mission giver in Red Dead Online 1898 for that obvious reason. Other characters that would still be alive: Hector, Trelawney, he survived the events of Red Dead Redemption 2. Sheriff Foreman's still alive because he's still the sheriff of Tumbleweed in 1907. Shaky, the boy, unfortunately. Thomas, Guido Martelli, because Guido Martelli is in charge. He is the mob boss in Saint Denis. And I feel like it was a wasted opportunity to use Guido for the blood money missions. It would have been more interesting to interact with Guido Martelli as a mob boss in Saint Denis and Red Dead Online 1908 than through the blood money missions and going after Capitelli in 1898. So I talked about the fact that there would be additions with this time shift for Red Dead Online from 1898 to 1908. And I think this is something that is going to appeal to a lot of you that are still on the fence with this idea. I know it's probably never going to happen, but this is an idea I've had for a long time, and I want to make a video about it. So here's some characters that may sound familiar to you that could be mission givers, strangers that you could encounter in Red Dead Online 1908. John Marston, Abigail Marston, Jack Marston, Uncle. Some of the other surviving members of the Vanderlyn gang that were not featured in Red Dead Online, such as Tilly, Mary Beth, as well as Pearson. He was the cook at the camp for the Vanderlyn gang. He clearly survives because he's in the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2. He's married. He has a shop in Rhodes now, so you would interact with him whenever you go to the general store in Rhodes. And since we don't encounter Bill Williamson or Javier or Dutch until 1911 in Red Dead Redemption, they could also serve as dishonorable mission givers. Dutch could be up at his hideout, just starting to cause things, working on his quote-unquote plan, bringing together more people under his new gang, so he could do missions for him. You could have Javier out there trying to get across the San Luis to Mexico. Maybe you help him do a few things. Bill Williamson hiding out somewhere with a very small gang in New Austin. He has his eyes set on Fort Mercer, but he hasn't taken over Fort Mercer yet. But by 1911, he does. So maybe you could do some missions for Bill Williamson, as well as Dutch and even Javier. So those are several characters from Red Dead Redemption 2 that survived the epilogue. That would be great mission givers and strangers to encounter in Red Dead Online 1908. Sadie would be a little different because we do encounter Sadie and her husband Jake in Red Dead Online in the 1898 version. They're still up at their ranch because the ranch hasn't been destroyed by the Driscolls and her husband hasn't been killed. But we'd have a little bit different Sadie Adler in Red Dead Online 1908 because she would no longer be at the Adler Ranch because it's gone now. Maybe she would be out in New Austin as a bounty hunter, similar to James Langton. So maybe she wouldn't be a dishonorable mission giver, but she would give you out honorable and dishonorable missions because now she's kind of taken over for James Langton now that he's out of the way. So that could be how you interact with Sadie in Red Dead Online 1908. She has two locations, one outside of McFarland Ranch, and then the other location you find her at would be Lake Don Julio, similar to James Langton. Now, Herman Thomas is a character from Red Dead Redemption 2 epilogue that took over as Sheriff of Rhodes sometime after Sheriff Gray was killed. So you would have Herman Thomas as your new mission giver as a sheriff in Rhodes. I guess he's the one you would interact with doing a bounty hunter mission. So yeah, all the other roles would still exist. Moonshiner, trader, collector, bounty hunter, even naturalist would still exist in Red Dead Online 1908, along with Sheriff Thomas in Rhodes instead of Sheriff Gray. And another character from Red Dead Redemption 1 that I would love to see included in Red Dead Online 1908, back in Armadillo when it's no longer collar-ridden and it's a thriving Wild West town once again, is Marshall Lee Johnson. It would be awesome if we had Marshall Lee Johnson back in Red Dead Online 1908. That would be awesome to have him as a stranger mission giver, plus the man you come to when you're turning in bounties to Armadillo. So a few other options that we could throw out there is maybe Seth, Nigel West Dickens. Maybe they're roaming around the place. You could do missions for them, as well as Edgar Ross and Archer Fordham. So those two definitely should be characters that you do missions for. Obviously dishonorable missions because Edgar Ross isn't exactly a nice guy. He's a federal agent and he's out there doing his thing, So he may have you doing like work for him, mercenary work, contract work. I would definitely have Edgar Ross and perhaps even his right-hand man, Archer Fordham, as mission givers for Red Dead Online 1908. So I feel like despite the fact we lose a few characters in Red Dead Online 1908 that have been killed in Red Dead Redemption 2, I feel like the trade-off is more than worth it because we get a lot of awesome characters from Red Dead Redemption 2 and even Red Dead Redemption 1. Plus, Evan Bonnie exists in 1908 as a mission giver as opposed to 1898. Makes more sense in my opinion. But hey, you get John Marston, you get Abigail Marston, you get Jack Marston, you might even get Dutch and Javier, Bill Williamson, Uncle, just to name a few. So yeah, I think that the trade-off is definitely well worth it. Plus, we no longer have Joe as a mission giver. That's worth it in itself. It sucks we lose Jake Adler, Hamish, and Sean McGuire, but, you know, trade-offs have to be made. Plus, the Driscolls are completely wiped out. Another positive for Red Dead Online 1908. Now, as I already mentioned, everything that exists in Red Dead Online would also exist in Red Dead Online 1908. The roles, all the missions, land of opportunities, etc. But the fact that this takes place a decade later opens up the opportunity for Rockstar to introduce other technology, other toys, innovations, vehicles from the 1900s, early 1910s era that might just bring more people to play Red Dead Online if it was set in 1908 as opposed to 1898. Yes, this is in the Wild West setting, but at the same time, it's also an online game, and you want to have this balance where you're bringing people into the game, but you want to have a lot of content for people to have access to, purchase, and play with and use in this online game. That's one of the things that makes GTA Online so appealing because you have a wide variety of content. You have land vehicles, water vehicles, air vehicles, and other content as well. So by moving up Red Dead Online to 1908, you would have access to innovations and technology and vehicles that now exist in the 1900s and early 1910s leading up to the Great War that you would not have necessarily in 1898. Now, there were bicycles. They were all the rage in the 1890s. I did a video about vehicles I would like to see in Red Dead Online, but that was set around 1898, which means we can take those ideas and expand upon them. So not only bicycles, but you could also have cars. And yeah, there was also cars in the 1890s, but there was even more vehicles, more innovations in vehicles in 1908, around that timeline, in the first and second decade of the 1900s. The horses are still primary. They're still way better than vehicles. So if you get a car, you're just getting a car because you want a car in Red Dead Online 1908. It doesn't mean it's going to be more than a match for a horse, because especially if you go off-road in a car, it's going to suck. You're still going to want to have a horse instead. And there's still going to be plenty of players that might just have a car just for fun, just to drive around, just to goof off with. But at the end of the day, there's going to be way more players that rather just have a horse, because horses are still more mobile. You can get around on horses. They're still at this point faster than your car from 1908. So you can still have horses, but you could also introduce cars from the first, perhaps going into the second decade of the 1900s. You could also have aeroplanes, biplanes. Now, this would be cool for a lot of players that would love to just fly around the map of Red Dead Online in 1908. It even have dogfights, so you could actually add biplanes from the First World War, even though that's a few years later. We could kind of bend the timeline rules on this one just a little bit, and we wouldn't make the aeroplanes, the biplanes OP. They would just have the bog standard weapons that they had in the First World War, like machine guns, the ability to drop bombs. But at the same time, players on the ground could counter these planes with explosive ammo and explosive arrows. So it's not like the airplanes and the biplanes would be too OP for cowboys and cowgirls riding around on the planes that are being targeted, especially if you happen to have explosive rounds and explosive arrows, which we currently do in Red Dead Online, to counter the planes flying above head. Now, most of the time, I think that the planes would focus on just fighting each other or just flying around the big, beautiful map of Red Dead Online, because if you ever did one of the bouncy bridge glitches where you could bounce really, really high up into the sky, the skybox is huge. I mean, it is amazing how far up you can go in the world of Red Dead Online. Such a wasted opportunity not to have some sort of aerial vehicles to fly around in, like early aeroplanes and biplanes from the 1900s, 1910s, even World War II era. I could also include gliders. I wanted to include gliders as an idea for vehicles for the current version of Red Dead Online because gliders were kind of sort of a thing in the 1890s. Not really, but once again, video games, you could simply spawn in a glider and just glide around the map of Red Dead Online. I think that would have been cool. So you could add gliders along with the aeroplanes, biplanes. You could even add, at this point, blimps and zeppelins because that's a thing in the 1900s and obviously in World War I. So you could have blimps and zeppelins. You could also have maybe the hot air balloons. Yes, we could technically have hot air balloons now in Red Dead Online, but for reasons we don't. So yeah, just include hot air balloons as well. And not to mention the fact that this opens the door for additional types of weapons that exist in 1908 that doesn't exist in 1898. So there's some more weapons that we could include in the arsenals of characters and in the gun stores for Red Dead Online 1908. And you can also add some clothing, some threads from the early 1900s time period. And there's so much more content that I talked about in a video recently. Red Dead Redemption 2 repackaged content I would love to see in Red Dead Online. Some of you probably have already watched that video. If you haven't, do so, because like there's boats we could add. There's a further customization to the camps. We'd also like to see more horses added from Red Dead Redemption 2 over to Red Dead Online. You can include those into Red Dead Online 1908. More properties, because we don't really have any properties other than the Moonshine Shack as well as our camp. And it would be nice if we actually could buy a house, buy a cabin. And I did a properties ideas video a while back. In fact, shameless plug for my ideas playlist. Yes, I like playlists. The ideas playlist has quite a few Red Dead Online themed ideas videos, properties, various role ideas I've had, vehicle ideas, etc. So go back, check them out. Those are all awesome ideas I would have loved to eventually seen added to Red Dead Online. And maybe, just maybe, in 2022, Rockstar will turn Red Dead Online around and add more roles and content. The way things are looking at the moment, it sadly looks highly unlikely. But even at this point, I do hold out a very, very small amount of hope that Rockstar is not sunsetting Red Dead Online, but it does look like that is the case, unfortunately. But to circle back to wrap up this video, I feel like if Rockstar would have made the decision to set Red Dead Online to 1908 as opposed to 1898 by leaving most of Red Dead Online that they built and created intact and simply just move it up a decade, it would have opened the door for more players, a larger community, as well as more content based off the technology, innovation, and vehicles, weapons, clothing that were available at this time period in 1908, as well as going into the First World War, that Rockstar could have used for content and updates, as well entice more players to hop into Red Dead Online if it was set in the year 1908 as opposed to 1898. For those of you that actually sat there and watched the entire video and allowed me to make my case to you, now I want to know your honest opinion. Do you like the idea of Red Dead Online being set in 1908? Or do you disagree with me entirely? Or do you disagree with some of my points? Or do you think that it should just remain in 1898? Your thoughts, your views, your opinions, as always, welcome below in the comments section.